Yo, 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 what up, everyone? Welcome back to Conspiracy. Today, we'll be talking about something that I mentioned briefly in my very first video on the channel. It's actually the first one I recorded, but it's my second video, now that I think about it. I talked about in the Salem Witch Trials video. Link here, or maybe here. It's in one of these corners. Not entirely sure which one yet, because I don't do this a lot. British settlers landed at Plymouth Rock and made the colony of Roanoke a topic for the future. Today we'll be talking about the mystery of the Roanoke colony in America. Early America, like 1590 early. First established in 1585 as one of the first English territories in North America at the behest of Queen Elizabeth I, the Roanoke colony was home to about 100 people or so. The colony was founded by Mr. Ralph Lane on Roanoke Island. Roanoke Island sits in modern-day Dare Country, North Carolina. The first colony did not last long. Tensions between them and the local natives were strained, they had food shortages, and the final straw on the original Roanoke colony was a hurricane that ravaged the area. Ralph Lane persuaded his men to evacuate the colony, and Francis Drake was able to take them back. Francis Drake had just led raids on Santo Domingo and had acquired slaves and refugees and hardware and food, which he was originally going to leave with the Roanoke colony to help ease their suffering. However, as he was on his way back to England anyway, he agreed to take Lane and his colony back to England with him. Some colonists did stay behind. There is no word as to what happened to the slaves and refugees that he got from Santo Domingo, though. It's thought they were just left on the island to make room for the colonists, because there's no record of them ever arriving in England. Despite the desertion of this colony, Walter Raleigh was persuaded to make another attempt in the area. Roanoke Island was no longer safe for the English due to the hostility of the natives in the area. The area that was recommended was Chesapeake Bay instead of the island of Roanoke for the settlement of the new colony. On January 7th, 1587, Raleigh approved a charter to found the city of Raleigh, with John White being governor and leader of the expedition. About 115 people agreed to join the colony, including John White's pregnant daughter, Eleanor, and her husband, Ananias Dare. The colony was made of mostly middle-class Londoners, many of whom wanted to own land. Honestly, owning land's the dream. Can't blame them. I feel them. Feel for them. Two people from the previous colony, who were taken back to England with Francis Drake, they were also on board. This time, the colony included women and children, and not as big of a military force as the previous one. The expedition consisted of 3 ships: the Lion, captained by John White, a flyboat, and a fully rigged pinnace, all of which departed on May 8th. The Lion and the pinnace, the flagship and pinnace landed on Croatan Island to explore and to pick up a few remaining colonists that stayed behind from the Lane party before continuing on to Chesapeake Bay. The next morning, the party found the site of Lane's colony. The fort had been dismantled while the houses stood vacant and overgrown with foliage, mostly melons. There was no sign that the colonists left behind had ever been there, except for some human bones that were believed to be one of the men's killed by the natives in the area. On July 25th, the flyboat finally landed as well, and all the colonists set foot on the island. Shortly afterwards, colonist George Howe was killed by a native while searching for crabs. He was by himself. John White dispatched a colonist named Stafford to re-establish relations with the Croatan people. Stafford met with Menteo, who was the leader of the tribe who befriended the Lane colony and helped negotiate peace for some time. Menteo described a coalition of mainland tribes that had attacked the small detachment left behind from the previous Lane colony. The colonists attempted to negotiate a truce through the Croatan, but received no response. On August 9th, John White led a preemptive strike on the Disappearance, but they had withdrawn from the village, fearing revenge for the death of George Howe, and the English accidentally attacked Croatan looters. Menteo, however, was able to once again smooth relations between the tribes and the English. For all the work that Menteo did for the colony, he was baptized and named Lord of Roanoke and Disappearance. Just days after the accidental strike on the Croatan, John White's daughter Eleanor Dare gave birth to her daughter, named Virginia, in honor of being the first Christian born in Virginia. Records also indicate that another colonist named Marjorie Haver gave birth shortly after, but there's literally no other information on this, on the birth or the child. The colony faced many of the same issues that the Lane colony had. They had issues with the native population despite help from Monteo. They had food shortages, weather problems, etc. The fleet of ships itself was preparing to return to England, and the colonists had persuaded Governor White to return to England with them to explain the colony's situation and ask for help. Despite his objections, he reluctantly agreed as he believed he needed to do what was best for the colony. White returned to England on November 5th, 1587. At this time, Queen Elizabeth had heard reports of the Spanish Armada mobilizing for an attack, so she ordered all able ships to not leave England so they could participate in the battle should it happen. During the winter, a man named Grenville was granted a waiver to lead a fleet to the Caribbean to attack the Spanish, and John White was permitted to join him in a resupply ship. The fleet was set to launch in March of 1588, but weather kept them in port until Grenville received new orders to stay and defend England. Two of the smaller ships in the fleet were deemed unsuitable for combat, and John White was allowed to take them to Roanoke. They departed England on April 22nd. On May 6th, the ships were attacked by French pirates near Morocco, and nearly 24 of the crew were killed, and the supplies that were for Roanoke were looted. So they turned around and went back to England. After their return, the Queen again said that no boats could leave. They defeated the Spanish Armada in August, but kept the ban on shipping in order to focus efforts on a counterattack against Spain in 1589. John White would not get permission to make another resupply run until 1590. So imagine being in the colony of Roanoke, right? You send your governor away in August of 1587. You hear nothing from him for years. The journey should have taken a little less than a year. It's been 3 years and there's no word from anyone. There's no resupply from anyone. There's just nothing going on. Eventually, John White was arranged passage on a privateering expedition captained by John Watts. The fleet was 6 ships strong, say that 10 times fast, and spent the summer of 1590 raiding Spanish outposts in the Caribbean. Eventually, 2 ships were split off to take John White back to his colony. The ships anchored on the Croatan Island on August 12th, but there was no indication that John White used this time to contact the Croatan people for any information. It actually wasn't until the 15th of August that they saw smoke on the island, and the following morning they investigated it as well as another plume they saw, but they didn't find anything. On August 17th, they sighted a fire on the north end of Roanoke and rowed towards it. They reached the island after nightfall and decided to not risk coming ashore. They spent the night on their boats, singing English songs, hoping that the colonists could hear. The party made landfall the next morning and found fresh tracks in the sand, but were not contacted by anyone. They also discovered the letters CRO carved into a tree. Once they reached the side of the colony, they noticed that the area had been fortified by a stake wall, a defensive wall made of wooden stakes. Near the entrance of the fencing, the word Croatan was carved into one of the posts. John White was certain that the 2 carvings meant that the colonists had peacefully relocated to Croatan Island, since they had agreed in 1857 that the colonists would leave a secret token indicating their destination should they leave. Within the stake wall, the search party found that the houses had been dismantled and anything that could be carried had been removed. Multiple trunks had been dug up and looted as well, some of which had belonged to John White, and he left them behind when he went back to England. None of the colony's boats could be found along the shoreline. The party returned to their boats that evening with plans to return to Croatan Island the next day. However, the main ship's anchor cable snapped, leaving the ship with only 1 working cable and anchor. The search mission could not continue due to the risk of a shipwreck. Now, I'm not a captain, or a sailor, or like a seaman in any way. I'm not sure how not having an anchor could cause a shipwreck. If you know, explain it down below, please, in the comments. That'd be great, because I have no clue. The ship had to go back to England for repairs. They arrived in October 1590. Although they failed to relocate the colonists in 1590, the report he submitted suggested that they simply relocated and they should still be found alive. Now, this actually benefited Walter Raleigh, who sent them on the expedition in the first place, because as long as the settlers could not be proven dead, he could legally maintain his claim on Virginia. However, in 1954, a petition was made to declare Aeneas Dare legally dead so that his son, John Dare, could inherit his estate. The petition was granted 3 years later in 1597. There was one final expedition in 1603 led by Bartholomew Gilbert with the intention of finding the colonists. The whole landing team was killed by a group of Native Americans on July 29th. Now, the colonists were never found, leading many to wonder what happened. What happened? These people just disappeared. Is it as simple as they actually did relocate to Croatan Island and they integrated with the locals? Did the Croatans break like their peace deal like they had set up and they killed them? Did another native tribe come along, kill them, blame the Croatans by writing Croatan on the fencing? Was it aliens? In all reality, though, the odds of the colony going to Croatan Island and integrating with the natives are pretty high. The reasoning for this is there were reports of pale-skinned, blonde-haired people among various American tribes, and those sightings occurred as early as 1607. This is frequently attributed to assimilated lost colonists as a whole, and not necessarily just lost Roanoke colonists. Another popular theory is that they built a boat to travel back to England, but the boat sunk and they all died. Kind of sad. But it is kind of interesting that no one is entirely sure what happened, like, for sure to these people. That's got to be terrible. You're living in terrible conditions. Someone's like, I'll be back, a couple months, less than a year for sure, with supplies and everything will be great. And you're like, great. And they're just gone and you never see them again. They are not coming back in a couple of months. They don't even get permission to come back for 3 years. And you just never see him again. And John White doesn't get to see his daughter or his granddaughter or his son-in-law ever again. And that's just kind of sad, It's really interesting to think aliens might have got him. Nobody really knows, People came back and they were just gone. They were just gone. And nobody ever found them. It's kind of one of those mysteries in life that it's like, well, there are a couple mysteries that are like, if I die and go to heaven and I get to ask questions, I want to know what happened to the Roanoke colony. Depending on how many questions I get, of course. There are several more pressing questions, I feel. But if I get a bunch of questions, yeah, sure, throw a Roanoke colony up on there. Anyway, what do you guys think happened to the colonists? They just disappeared. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And thank you all so much for watching. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.